Also, in the last 2 weeks, Donald Trump has been elected for another 4 years in the United States, you may have noticed. Do you think that changes things dramatically for us?
It's great for consumers. It'll be great for energy consumers because if he goes with drill, baby, drill, which, by the way, is an extension of what they've already been doing, and Chris Wright, as much as people might scream about him, is the most energy literate energy secretary they'll ever have. So he's in charge of Liberty Energy. He was one of the drivers of fracking in the United States. For those that worry about climate change, by the way, the reduction in the United States had the biggest reduction in the last 15 years of fossil fuels, of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere came from the United States, which replaced coal with natural gas. It burns cleaner. It burns so cleanly, by the way, that we can burn it in our households. That's how clean natural gas is. And that guy was behind that reduction in fossil fuels. Now, expect that there will be an outcry about him being there, but Donald Trump is about to pull out of the Paris Agreement, and I expect Argentina will follow him. And then the rest of the world will look around at the deck of cards that it's got in its hand and wonder what on earth it's doing, and look at the example of a place like Germany. What did Germany manage to do? It built the system that we wanted, Laura. It had the wind that we were after. And guess what? It didn't work without Russian gas. They had outsourced their energy security to a country that was likely to become an adversary. And by the way, I think energy explains most of geopolitics. So I think that Russia was emboldened to invade Ukraine because it did not believe that Germany would be able to fight back because the lifeline to its energy came directly from its adversary. And who puts themselves in that kind of position? And by the way, we're now going to be importing liquefied natural gas into Australia, and we've got tons of it. We're just not using it. And geostrategically, how stupid is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you don't mince your words, Chris, and absolutely. It's a good question. How stupid is that? I think the answer is very. But nothing focuses the mind like an election. We've got one just around the corner. Do you think there's an opportunity from being out of this documentary to perhaps recalibrate what Australia's long-term and medium-term goals are on energy?
Yeah, look, I think we need to have a conversation about what we're doing and ask ourselves the question as we look around the world. If carbon emissions in the world have risen every single year since we began the carbon cutting journey at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, which they did, the only time, by the way, they ever get cut is when there is some kind of massive recession. So during the financial crisis, and we cut them dramatically during COVID. And that's a picture of the future. If you want to see what the energy future looks like, don't use any, and you can actually achieve this. I think that if the argument had been put to the Australian people at the outset is that, look, we think that climate change is really important. It is happening. We need to do something about it. But this is the trade-off. The trade-off is that the grid that we're going to be building will be extremely expensive, deeply unreliable, and you are going to have to sacrifice part of your cost of living. Do you think that they would have signed up for that project?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying now is we should have an honest discussion. And by the way, there is no cheap energy future from here, Laura. It is, yes, nuclear energy is very expensive. But by the way, it provides baseload power. And now the artificial intelligence centres of the world, that's what they want.
Yeah, there's no cheap option. Remember the neg under Malcolm Turnbull. Remember the greatest moral challenge of our time under Kevin Rudd. And here we are all these years later, really still debating it. But what strikes me about this, Chris, is that during those times, it was relatively good times. You had, lower interest rates. People were feeling like they were getting ahead. Now we're smack bang in the middle of a housing and cost of living crisis where, it always happens. We could see this happening. Climate change then, is all of a sudden down the list of priorities because people are struggling to put food on the table and pay their bills.
And two things on earth explain the way that people operate in the long run. One is energy and the other is food. And so when those things come under threat, then that's when governments change. So look, the government can continue on the path that it's going at the moment. It can continue, and by the way, they've never backed away from that $275 pledge. But I genuinely think in interviews now, the energy minister should be laughed out of the room with some of the things that he says. Somebody who says that the wind and sun don't send a bill, that's not a serious human being. Right? The wind and sun might not send a bill, but your energy retailer does. And by the way, turning it into a competent electricity system is ridiculously expensive. So we've got options and we should look at them. The Earth does not come to an end in 2050. No matter what people say, climate change is not an existential crisis. Do we adapt or do we spend money, do we spend an enormous amount of money trying to believe that from Australia we can change the climate when China's not doing it, India's not doing it, Indonesia's not doing it, and quite obviously the United States is not now going to be doing it. So what on earth are we doing?
Well, if only the Energy Minister would do interviews, Chris, then I could ask all of those questions. Thank you so much for joining AM Agenda this morning. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Take care.
Chris Uhlmann's exclusive new documentary, The Real Cost of Net Zero, airs tonight at 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time, and that is one not to miss.